On this edition of the Table of Content, we are joined by T.M. Gaouette, a Catholic writer, blogger, and author who has a focus for teen literature. We'll talk with her about why this is her focus and why she thinks this is important. Stay tuned. That's coming up next, right here on the Table of Content. Thanks so much for tuning in to this edition of the Table of Content. I am your host, Albert Saenz. Always glad to have you on board for another episode. And we are joined today by T.M. Gaouette, an author, a writer, a blogger. And I can't wait to kind of dig in more to who she is and what she does. But first, let me thank her for joining us. T.M., thanks for being with us.
Thank you, Albert, for having me.
Super. I'm so glad, and I really want to get into this conversation, but I'd like for you to have an opportunity to give our listeners a little bit of background on who you are, what you do, where you kind of came from, and how you ended up kind of where you are right now. So if you can find a brief synopsis, I'd love to hear about it.
Well, where do I start? Okay, so I was born in Africa, and I grew up in London, and then came to the United States, where I went to college and started living here. Got married, have 4 children. Yes, I homeschool. We also live on a little farmstead here, so we have goats and chickens. And I also write Catholic fiction for teens.
Well, that's a really good, I mean, that was great. That was super. I don't think you went over 40 seconds. That's fantastic. But I've got to try and open that up just a little bit. So
okay.
You were born in Africa and then ended up all the way over in the United States. So how'd you get from Africa to here?
Well, that would not have been me personally. That travel, that would have been my parents.
Got it.
My parents lived in Africa where I was born. My sister and I were born there, and we moved from there at a very young age. I was about 4 years old when my parents actually divorced, and my mother moved to England, and we lived there until I was, I think, about 2021. And I moved here to New Hampshire to go to college. I went to St. Anselm College here in Goffstown or Manchester. And my mother stayed in London and actually since then has moved to New Zealand. So my sister is also in New Zealand too, but I'm here now where after college I started working and just ended up living here, became a citizen in 2012, and everything is pretty much history.
Okay. Well, all right. Well, I appreciate kind of taking us on the world map of TM's life from Africa to here. Now, you said that you got into your sort of work, but you're a writer and an author. And I sort of nodded to in the intro that you have a real particular type of focus. Can you expand upon where you really focus your writing on?
Yes. So when I started writing years ago, my first book that was published in 2012 was The Destiny of Sunshine Ranch. And that was for young teens, middle schoolers, to young adults. And around that time or prior to that time, I wrote for all different ages. I wrote, for children. I wrote stories for parents, for their babies, and so on and so forth. But I really... I think I became more connected to writing for teens because when I was a teen, I remember, the struggles that I went through as a teenager, and, trying to connect and just understand the world that I was living in. And I think I really connected to that moment and wanted to write for that demographic, for teens and young adults who needed some help in their lives, needed help through their struggles, needed guidance towards their faith, because I honestly feel that the teenage years are extremely confusing. I remember at that time dealing with contradicting emotions from day to day, dealing with physical and hormonal changes and friends, and but basically a lot of conflicting emotions. And oftentimes the media helps us connect or cling to something that's comforting. And I just felt that writing for that age group I could offer them something that would guide them in a better direction, lead them towards a more faith-filled life.
But, and let me play the other side here, but aren't there already plenty of teen books? Isn't there plenty of books for them to get their hands on? Why take up the mantle yourself, when there's already kind of stores full of teen novels?
There are lots of teen novels out there. And, as a parent, I think it began when I was pregnant and thinking about what it would be like to try and bring up a child and to try and guide them in the right direction. There are a lot of books out there, but not all of them. In fact, at that time, there weren't many of them that I felt were appropriate for our children. There are a lot of secular books out there, and even remembering my childhood and my upbringing, one of the things I loved to do was to read, and I read a lot when I was a child. I loved to read. I was constantly reading. I'd read on the way to school while my sister was guiding me along the road. But I didn't read a lot of good stuff, and I feel that at that age, because you are going through a lot of struggle, a lot of questioning, you accept what feels good at the time. And if you're not reading the right things, then you can probably end up accepting things that go against morality, or, I don't want to go and dig too deep into some of the things that you can find in these books. I don't think it's absolutely necessary to do that. I think a lot of people already understand that. So I just feel that there isn't enough out there that guides a child or guides a teen or a young adult along the right path that will lead them to salvation, that will lead them to being a better person or living a moral life. So I felt that was lacking, that, we had a lot of nice Catholic classic books out there that a lot of, that we often lean upon, but there wasn't anything, I felt, at least at the time, contemporary fiction or fiction from a newer fiction that parents could rely on and that they could trust and that they could give to their children, which would, help them and encourage them in their faith. I feel Catholic fiction is extremely beneficial because it counteracts that secular or anti-Christian fiction, giving it a godlier perspective. And it also teaches the Catholic faith in a natural way, so we can see characters living in a Catholic situation or just living in the world, but needing to instill their faith in their lives. And that's not an easy thing to do. A lot of kids don't understand what that means.
Right. I mean, it's one thing to just sort of go up to any person, but it's one thing to go up to a teen and say, hey, you should be following the commandments. You should be doing what the Lord tells you to do. You should be living a moral life, on and on and on. And they sort of stare at you blankly and say, why? Why do I have to do all these things? It sounds terrible and boring, and I'm just going to go out and do my own thing. Versus what you're doing, and what I think other authors in your position are trying to do is, okay, let's make the faith something that people can actually relate to instead of just giving them a list of do's and don'ts. Let's make a story. Let's make it relational. Let's actually let's relate to real problems that teens and young adults are going through, because I think it's really easy sometimes to sort of go surface level and not really tackle some of those issues, which are very real to teenagers. But no one wants to talk to them about it because they're kind of thinking, oh, well, that's kind of, hocus pocus stuff, and that's too dark to talk about. We'll wait until you're older to talk about it. In the meanwhile, the teens, the young adults, they're learning from their friends, they're learning from the media, learning from everyone else, but they have no good guide, as you were trying to say. But a book like this has such potential to say, okay, here is the important things I was trying to tell you, but let's lay it on a little bit easier, but still get into some of these topics that are really important and really, really necessary to talk about, because a lot of time these discussions just don't happen. So I think it's good that providing a fiction book is a good way to make some of these necessary conversations happen.
Exactly. And, as a parent of a teen or a young adult, they don't want to hear us. They don't, I remember as being that age, not wanting to hear what my my mother had to say, because oftentimes you get to that point and all of a sudden you're smarter than your parents.
Oh,
right?
yeah.
So you don't want to hear anything they have to say. You roll your eyes and you're like, whatever, and it doesn't sound like fun. It doesn't sound like a faith-filled life. It doesn't sound very fun, especially when you don't even understand what that means. And oftentimes, and sadly, I mean, we live in a world where a lot of even Catholics don't even understand their own faith. So, this is something that I think that is really fundamental and really important, that, the Catholic fiction, when you bring them a story, and we all know that Jesus talked in parables, and he talked in parables so that people can understand what the teachings were by relating themselves to certain situations. And stories are those are parables, and teens can hopefully see themselves in some of the characters, and that they're so great in teaching social situations without feeling preachy, especially if you have a great, Catholic story that really gets a teen into a situation, really gets them into the storyline, into the plot, and gets them connected with characters, then they can see themselves in those characters. And it's a really great way to begin discussions, like you said, because a teen can talk to a parent about a book and in a way kind of bring themselves into it without pointing directly to themselves. They can talk to their parents about certain issues. They can talk to them about bullying or faith struggles or theology of the body or dating through characters. And it's easier to talk through a character because it's not personal. And then you can say whatever you want. Your teen can speak freely. You can respond freely because they're not, you're not talking directly to them and saying, well, you have to live in this certain way. And and that's the thing you're trying to avoid through fiction, is to have this preachy, you must do this. It's rather an opportunity to show them how you live in the world without being in the world, without picking up the habits of the world, which is what we're not supposed to do.
And I think that's important because, I think that stories, books, especially if they're well written and they're engaging, they can inspire their readers to sort of either side. I would, I can't say I've done any scientific statistical studies, but it seems fair to say that some of the other teen books that are out there that are full of a lot of the immorality that we don't want our teens exposed to could be very inspirational to them in that way. And he's like, well, we do need that counterbalance. We need something on the other side to say, okay, look, that may be an option, but I have an option too, and it's a whole lot better. So a really good book can really engage the person. So I think if you can get a book like this that's really well written into the hands of a young person, you stand a good chance to inspire them to think about the life choices that they're making.
Yes, and it's not, it's not just putting them in these situations. A lot of parents struggle with trying to show or prepare their children for the world, and you don't want to drop them in Vegas and say, well, here you go, right?
Right.
So there has to be a way that can be done where they can kind of get an idea of how to deal with the world and live in the world and be in the world without actually being soiled by the world or tainted by the world. I always say to my kids, I'm not trying to spoil your fun. I'm just trying to save your soul. There's only so much you can do. But the other thing also about the fiction is that it gives you an opportunity to see what a role model is. We all know the kind of role models children are up against now. We've seen them. I don't need to elaborate on certain sports figures or musicians, or we see them around us, and there's a lot of bad role models that our children are aspiring to.
Sure.
And these books, great books that can really pull our children in, can offer them positive role models, and not just role models of the type of people they should choose as friends or people that they should hang out with, but also, more importantly, I feel they offer role models of how you should be, what you can give your friends, what kind of person you can be. So, I remember someone who had read one of my books who had said, oh my gosh, I wish I had known friends like this and the kind of people I can hang out with. I didn't know anyone like this. But then you can be that person instead, and you can be that person for someone else out there who maybe needs you. So it's an opportunity to not only show you the kind of person you can be, that God wants you to be, or the kind of person that you should hang out with, but also how to be that kind of person in a flawed world. And when we're not all saints, we are supposed to strive to be saints. That's our objective. And yeah, we fall. Yeah, we struggle. And there are characters in my stories that do fall, who try to be saints and fall. But readers should come away always recognizing that Christ is merciful and that he's provided us a way, through reconciliation, penance, to try again, to do better, and to be better, and to strive to be the saints that God wants us to be.
And I'm so glad that you made that point. I'm so glad that it's not just about making a decision from a story to sort of do what's good, to do what's moral, to do what's right, but it's also about trying to inspire the person, the reader, to be that good person, to be that person striving for saintliness, that person striving to get up every day and do what's good, and to be that person for others. Because I think that's sort of a chain reaction. And when we can see in ourselves, hey, I can be that person, I can be like that, I want to be like this character, I think you sort of, for a lack of a better analogy, you light a fuse, and it goes off to the next one, and hopefully it kind of continues on. Even if all they can do is say, hey, to their friend, hey, I just read this book, I think you should read it, I think it'd be really awesome.
Exactly.
So then that person hopefully maybe has a thought, and they're saying, wow, this is actually a good, good read, and I can talk to my friend about it more. We can expand upon these topics, or I can work on being that person myself. So I'm glad about that point, trying to create a desire to want to be a better person for the people around them.
Yes. And oftentimes we don't see that. We don't even see that in our real lives. It's not often. I mean, if you think about the friends that you have as an adult, or even for your kids to have, how many friends do they have, and how many of those friends would you consider to be really positive role models for them? Mm-hmm. And there aren't that many. And that, I feel that the percentage of that in even the entire country or the entire world is very minimal compared to what it should be like. So it has to start somewhere. And if it can't start with one of your friends, if your child or your teen or you yourself don't have someone in your life that is that light, then it's up to us to be that light. We have to start somewhere. And if you're not sure how to do that, then hopefully this fiction and these stories and these characters can guide you and show you how to at least start being that.
So, TM, let's try here in the last kind of part of the show to see if we can perhaps entice the listeners to maybe want to pick up some of the books that you've written. Let's see if we can maybe just sort of give some brief synopsis here of a couple of stories that I know I was interested in from a topic standpoint. You have a series called the Faith and Kung Fu series. Is that right?
Yes.
And they follow a young man named Gabriel, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And he's a young man, a Christian. He happens to like Kung Fu and martial arts. And he has encounters in his own life, which sort of test him, but also he's that potential character to inspire others. Can you talk a little bit more about this series?
Yeah, so this series is so far there's 3 books, and I'm working on the last book in the series this year. And yes, it's the Faith in Kung Fu series, and it's basically the Kung Fu is important to the series not only because Gabriel is not only strong in his faith but loves to do Kung Fu and is really very good at it. But the reason I picked Kung Fu is because Kung Fu is a concept. It's a skill. It's not so much a martial art as a skill or a way of achieving perfection through dedication and hard work. So it's a way of studying and learning and practicing and patience and energy and all these things that are part of Kung Fu is part of what Gabriel uses in his faith as well. So it's kind of a reflection. So the discipline and the virtues fostered through his pursuit of excellence in Kung Fu kind of translate to his spiritual life, and he uses it oftentimes to get closer to God. So if he's angry or frustrated or needs to calm down a little bit, he uses that to calm him down so he's in the right mindset for prayer and so on and so forth, which is really important for all of us. I think we have to find something, that we can used to bring us closer to God, to unite us in prayer and meditation. So you'll have moments in some of the stories on where he uses kung fu to bring himself closer to God, and in other ways bring Tana Rose, who is this Hollywood starlet that he meets in the first story, bring her closer to God, because she struggles. She's from Hollywood. She's a starlet living the life, and unfortunately she's been tainted with her fame, with drugs and alcohol and so on and so forth. And she's been brought to his house by her mother to stay with Gabriel and his mother so that she can, get in the right mindset. So she's ready for her next role, kind of thing. And so you have these two different, complete opposite people. You've got Tana Rose, who's all of the world. She's just all about it and riches and fame. And then you've got Gabriel, who's completely indifferent to those things, who's 100% dedicated to his faith, to his mother, taking care of her. And they clash, how seeing the two of those characters come together and just butt heads is interesting, but also it shows how Gabriel has to open up and be more compassionate and more patient, and use the tools of kung fu to open up and be more loving towards Tana Rose in a way that brings her closer to God. And the series has Tana in the first one, and then brings some other characters in the second one. She comes back in the third, and it's just how Gabriel is trying to survive in this world, and he also is dealing with emotions and struggles and personal conflicts that he needs to get through. In fact, he thinks he should be a priest because he's afraid of the world, because it might taint him, may turn him, because he sees Tana Rose and what she's going through. So there's a lot of conflict, emotional conflict, and a lot of character conflicts and stuff going on in those three stories.
Sure, but I mean that's important. I mean that's a real teenager's life, conflict, lots of struggles, lots of questions, lots of I don't know what to do's, lots of thoughts on the future. Who am I going to be? So yeah, it sounds definitely like a series that really is putting a good perspective on I guess we could call the teenage struggle, the teenage drama. Because I think a lot of the young adult stories tend to just go ahead and they make the main protagonist, just one way, and they just sort of go with it. They might be struggling with something, but it's just who they are. There's not really a sense of redemption in the story. We're just going to ride these flaws that this character has been created with, and that's just going to be who they are, instead of, well, can we have a sense of the character is looking for redemption, that they're looking for something greater, versus just, well, let's monopolize on these really dark things or these struggles or these immoral things just so we can sell a book and say that, look, we're a New York Times bestseller. Teens love our books. Yeah, but it's just full of stuff that we don't want our kids to read. So I appreciate that this series, the Faith and Kung Fu series, sounds like it's a real. This is a real teenager's life.
Yeah, and Gabriel also deals with other characters in there. In the first story we have Tana Rose, but in the second story, in Saving Faith, we have Christian and then his friend Faith. So we've got Christian, who's this bad boy who comes into Faith's life, and Faith is supposed to be this really godly girl who's a friend of Gabriel's, and then she slowly turns away from the faith because it's boring. And she wants to have more excitement, and she meets this guy who's really cool and blah, blah, blah. And then so you deal with those dynamics, and she starts hanging out with the wrong crowd because she just feels like her, Christian friends are just too boring. And then in the third story, we meet Aaron, and Aaron is being bullied in school. And he's struggling and angry about what he's going through, and he wants to learn Kung Fu so he can beat the out of his bully, and Gabriel has to come in all these situations and try and help all these people, but again he's also got his other struggles. So there's a lot of dynamics going on and a lot of up and downs, and I just feel like, like you said, that's a teen's life. It's very emotional. But then other than the Kung Fu series, I have my first story, which is the foster care story, the middle school one. And that's just about a young boy, Benedict, who finds himself in another foster care situation. It's a home foster care where the parents, Martha, sorry, I can't remember my own characters' names. Martha and David are very strong in their faith. And so the parents, are having to deal with these children who have all come from different backgrounds, who have dealt with a lot of struggles, a lot of hardships, a lot of sadness. And they're trying to hold these children together and show them that there is a brighter future and that they don't need to use their past adversity to move forward, that they can put that behind them without having to forget it, but use it to strengthen them in the future. And then another story is For Eden's Sake, and this is the one that actually received the first place CPA award last year for books for young adults. And this is a pro-life story about a young man who makes a mistake, meets a girl after having a few drinks at a bar one night, which is totally outside of what he usually is. I mean, he's a good Christian boy, and one day he goes out, hangs out with his friends, gets drunk, meets a girl he thinks is really pretty, and goes home with her. And then, weeks later, a few months later, she contacts him saying that she's pregnant. And then we're dealing with this. He's Christian and very pro-life, and I got to get on with my life. I can't have this. My dad's going to be mad at me. I got to get rid of this kid. And then you've got these dynamics going on and what happens with that. And that's a really, really tough subject to discuss. But it shows the two sides, the pro-life side and the pro-choice side, and how those dynamics come together. And
that is sort of, one of those. That is sort of the hot topic, right? I mean, that is the ongoing battle, and it's, to not shy away from it and to sort of give light to the situation and to make it sort of real and to come at it from the angle of faith versus normal secular Hollywood, which tends to just sort of play it off as just a choice, and
exactly.
really sort of gives no respect to the life. It's a very necessary, I would say, book to open up that conversation.
It is. And I think the biggest thing about this story is that it's primarily from the male's point of view. And you always have, a lot of pro-choice folks saying men should have nothing to do with this. This is a woman's thing. It's a woman's body. It's got nothing to do with him. And yet the baby is part his. The baby's made partly from him. And so it's just it's a ridiculous argument. Men love babies too. And what do you do? I mean, the whole point of the story was founded upon the idea that what does a man do when he has a baby that it's almost like he has no control over? It's his own child. What does he do? And I think that it's a really important message because men really need to speak up more and they need to take more control of these situations. And it's not an easy one because they have been pushed out. But this is a story from their point to show that, that they have a voice and they need to be heard as well. So, Isaac, the character in this story, has to figure out what he's going to do. He's dealing with this belligerent girl who basically is telling him, well, if you're not going to help me, I'm going to figure out a way to do it. And he's got to be patient. He's got to be kind. He's got to be loving because she could just go out at any moment and get it done, Right. So he has to find a way to kind of, plead with her and try and get her to understand what he's going through. And it's not easy, but, but he has to do it. And I do have a novella which I wrote last year as well called Shadow Stalker. And Shadow Stalker is about one day, the world wakes up with these people just trying to basically hurt themselves. And it's almost like they've gone crazy. And the main character has to try and find out what's going on and where it's all coming from and why they're all acting this way. And it's a thriller. And so I don't want to go too much into it because it's a short story and there's not much to it, but it's kind of like he's got to figure out why all these people are behaving this way. All of a sudden they're all going to churches. They're all, looking for reconciliation. Some of them aren't even bothering. They're all it's just pretty much chaos. And he's trying to figure out why this is happening.
Well, definitely a lot of options there from that have come out from your mind out to the pen or typewriter or computer, whatever it is that you use as your medium. So definitely a lot there.
Jesus is my medium.
Jesus is the medium. Yes.
Yes.
Now, before we lose time, we wanted to talk about how people can track down your books, but not just your books, because you were telling me there's a website where it is focused on Catholic teen books, and appropriately, the website is called catholicteenbooks.com. Can you give us just a little bit about that before we gotta wrap it up?
Yes, absolutely. Real quick, Catholic Teen Books I'm actually a member of the group where we have tons of books featured on our website, and all these books have been vetted so parents can be confident that their children are reading wholesome and godly books. They're all fantastic stories, all different genres. We have a bunch of different authors that specialize in different genres. So we have, historical fiction. Susan Peake does a lot of that. We have Leslie Wall doing romances. We have Corinna Turner doing a lot of dystopian stuff. Teresa Linden does contemporary stuff as well. And there's a lot of other authors on there. And the reason why I want to mention it is because I kind of specialize in contemporary fiction, but there is so much out there for Catholic fiction. And I feel that this website, it's currently growing, getting more and more books on it. And it's such a great resource for Catholic parents who are looking for wholesome, exciting, adventurous stories that they can, get for their kids that also promote the faith and strengthen the faith and hopefully guide their teens into a more fruitful, more godly environment that kind of gives them the idea of what it means to live in the world but not being of the world.
Well, there it is, ladies and gentlemen, a website dedicated to Catholic fiction, Catholic teen fiction, all genres, all styles, it sounds like, and it's growing. So if you are looking for a resource for good literature, good Christian vetted literature by authors who are dedicated to this, please go to catholicteenbooks.com and see what they have for choices. TM, thanks so much for taking some time to be with us on the show. Very, very glad to have you.
Thank you so much for having me.
And also, thanks for the work that you are doing. I believe it's sorely needed. I think all the avenues of media need sort of a revival. Books, music, movies, shows. They could stand to have a great change from what they are to what they could be. So thank you for the part that you are playing in that.
Thank you so much, and thank you for everything you do too.
Very welcome. Ladies and gentlemen, again, catholicteenbooks.com. TM Gaouette has a website that'll be linked on the YouTube version of this. So if you want to go to her website to find out more about her and her books, I'll have that link as well as the catholicteenbooks.com. Thanks so much for tuning in, and we look forward to you joining us again for the next episode of The Table of Content. Until then, be good, stay safe, peace.